It's 3 o'clock, so let's go ahead and get started. I think some more folks will still be joining us as we go, and that's fine. My name is Adam Podowitz-Thomas. I'm a board member with Philadelphia Family Pride, and I use he, him, his pronouns. Thanks you all for attending the conference today. We're glad to see such great turnout. It's been really good, and thank you for sticking around for this last session. I think we're going to cover some really interesting things that I hope folks will be able to use moving forward. I did want to remind everyone that this session is being recorded and we're going to post it online at a later date. So to the extent that it makes you more comfortable, feel free to turn off your camera. We also ask that everyone keep themselves muted just to make sure that our speakers are clearly understood. I also want to take just a moment of introductory privilege to encourage everyone to register to vote, particularly if you are located in Pennsylvania. We've only got about another week and a half left before registration closes. And it's really important that we all make sure that our voices are heard through the use of our ballots this fall. So, please make sure you're registered, make sure everyone you know is registered. This is really important. Also want to take a moment and mark that this weekend is Indigenous Peoples Weekend, and that for those of us that are located in the Philadelphia region, that we are located on Lenape land, and that I think it's really important that we recognize that and recognize what's happened to that tribe. After the pandemic eventually subsides, they have a cultural center in Easton, Pennsylvania that I would really recommend folks check out. It's really good at giving you information about what the tribe's history is and its relation to this region. And then finally, I want to remind everyone that this afternoon is Outfest, Philly's annual National Coming Out Day festival, and we'll be hosting a virtual watch party, which you can find additional information. I think it was in the email that Stephanie sent out. So today's panel is going to include 3 speakers, and after they've spoken, we're going to have a time for an extended Q&A. I'm fortunate that I've been asked to introduce our first speaker, Leslie Cooper. Leslie is Deputy Director of the ACLU LGBT and HIV Project. And since joining the project in 1988, much of her work has been focused on protecting the rights of LGBT parents and their children. She was lead counsel in the cases that brought down Florida's notorious ban on adoption by lesbians and gay men and a similar restriction in Arkansas. In addition to her work on parenting, Leslie has brought cases involving a range of issues, including the freedom to marry, LGBT students' rights at school, employment discrimination against LGBT and HIV positive workers, and access to health care for transgender prisoners. She also works on state legislative advocacy on a variety of issues. Leslie's going to speak today about the upcoming Supreme Court case, Fulton versus Philadelphia, in which PFP is an intervener and defendant, and in which Leslie and the ACLU is representing our organization. So with that, I'll turn it over to Leslie.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Adam. It's great to be here at a Philadelphia Family Pride event. Sorry here, just having trouble with my computer. Give me one moment. Okay. These Zoom conferences, they're a lot. So, I've been representing Philadelphia Family Pride in the Fulton case for the past 2 years now, so it really is great to have the opportunity to talk to the PFP community. When we first heard that there was a dispute brewing in Philadelphia between the city and one of the foster care agencies that it hires to provide foster care services, and that particular agency was not willing to certify same-sex families, and we knew that litigation was likely. We knew even back then in 2018 that this case could have very serious implications for the enforceability of non-discrimination requirements in the face of religious objections. And we knew it could have serious implications for children in the foster care system who can't afford to have foster families cast aside based on a religious test. So we were thrilled when PFP was eager to get involved in the case for the same reasons we were. PFP members are among those families most directly affected by the case, and PFP's efforts to promote fostering in the community would be severely compromised should the outcome of the case be that the government contracted foster care agencies have a constitutional right to discriminate against our families. But the case, as Adam said, is now before the Supreme Court, and it therefore has implications for children in foster care and families, not only in Philadelphia, but across the country, and for the enforceability of federal, state, and local non-discrimination laws of all kinds. So I imagine most of you are familiar with the facts of the case, but I'll just do a quick summary for those who may not be, to sort of the lead up to how we got where we are. As everywhere, I think, across the country, the city hires a number of private organizations to provide foster care services for children in the city's custody. That has been common in child welfare systems across the country for decades now, that partnering with the private sector to provide these important services. And part of that includes finding and screening prospective foster families. And back in March of 2018, a reporter called the commissioner, then commissioner in Philadelphia, DHS, to say that 2 of the contracted agencies were not willing to certify same-sex couples, regardless of their qualifications, based on their religious beliefs, the agency's religious beliefs. And the commissioner informed those agencies that that directly violated the city's contracts with all of the agencies, and said they couldn't continue partnering if they're not willing to comply. And so one of those agencies, Bethany Christian Service, said, okay, we'll comply. The other, Catholic Social Services, sued the city. And CSS claims that the free exercise clause of the Constitution gives it a right to get a taxpayer-funded government contract to provide a government service to children in government custody, even though they are unwilling to comply with the contract's non-discrimination requirement that would ensure that all qualified families could be welcomed, because they said doing so would conflict with its religious beliefs. They further claimed that the city was acting out of anti-religious hostility towards the agency's Catholic religious beliefs about marriage. In other words, that they didn't really have a non-discrimination policy for all the reasons many child welfare programs and governments have non-discrimination requirements, but rather they concocted this in order to penalize Catholic social services because they disapproved of their religious beliefs. The ACLU intervened in the case on behalf of PFP, as well as the Support Center for Child Advocates, some of you may be intimately familiar with, who advocate for children in dependency cases, including many foster children, or children in foster care. So the Catholic Social Services asked the court for a preliminary injunction, which for hopefully lots of non-lawyers out there means an order that would force the city to continue contracting with them while the case was being litigated, preliminary ruling. So the court held a 3-day evidentiary hearing with witnesses, and at the end rejected all of the allegations of supposed anti-religious targeting as unsupported by the evidence. The court found rather that the city had a non-discrimination requirement, that it applied to all of the foster care agencies it contracts with, and allowed no exceptions. The court also held under Supreme Court precedent that the question then is whether the policy, the non-discrimination policy, furthers any legitimate government interests, found that it furthered many, including not discriminating against Philadelphia residents seeking to participate in government programs, and maximizing the pool of families available to care for children in the foster care system in Philadelphia. So the court rejected their claim, said that it denied the preliminary injunction. They appealed. The Third Circuit, all 3 judges on the panel unanimously affirmed, and the CSS asked the Supreme Court to hear the case, which, as we all know now, they agreed to do. And the status right now is that the briefing is all complete and the argument has been set for November 4th, the day after the election. Wonderful timing. So we will be presenting argument along with counsel for the city of Philadelphia. So, you know, the fact that the court agreed to hear this case is worrisome, because CSS's claim is quite extraordinary and has absolutely no support in the law. It is claiming that the Constitution gives you a right to get government money, taxpayer dollars, to provide a government service and do it the way you want rather than the way they hired you to do so. There's just no law to support such a claim. The Supreme Court has long recognized that when the government hires employees or contractors to do the work of government, they can set religiously neutral conditions for doing that work, just like others. So government employees and government contractors just don't have a constitutional right to dictate how they do their job that they've been hired to do and how government programs operate, and they don't have a constitutional right to deny services to eligible participants. Again, no case law whatsoever to support this. So this claim quite far out there, yet not only did the court agree to hear the case, 3 justices on the court at an earlier stage when the case was at the Court of Appeals said they would have granted an emergency motion filed by CSS for an injunction pending appeal. In other words, they were asking, the CSS asked the Supreme Court while the case was pending on appeal at the Third Circuit to issue an order granting them, the right to get a contract from the city, even though they were not following the contract requirements. This legal standard for that is super high. You have to show there's really no quarrel in the case law about it. And even though there is no quarrel in the case law about it, that it goes our way, the court denied the request, but 3 justices, Justices Alito, Gorsuch, and Thomas, said they would have granted the relief. And this was when there was an 8-member court pre-Justice Kavanaugh. So all of this obviously is very troubling about the direction the court is moving. So what are the outcomes, possible outcomes in this case? There are a lot of different things that could happen, but in sort of 3 big buckets. The first would be the court affirms the decisions below and rejects CSS's claims, leaving in place the status quo. That would mean governments may continue to require those they hire to provide government services to serve all eligible individuals. It seems remarkable that we have to, that's on the table, right? But that would be one outcome. That would be the best outcome. The court could rule in favor of CSS based only on the alleged anti-religious hostility. Folks may recall a couple of terms ago the case Masterpiece Cake Shop involving a bakery, where the bakery said they had a religious objection to providing a wedding cake for the marriage of a same-sex couple. They made the same kind of claims that there's a constitutional right to opt out of the non-discrimination requirement based on religious objections. But the court did not answer that question in the case. The court only said, well, look, putting that question aside, there's anti-religious hostility demonstrated by the Colorado Human Rights Commission and didn't give a fair hearing to the baker, so we invalidate it. So it's possible the court could accept the allegations that Philadelphia acted with anti-religious hostility. Again, the district court rejected all of that as a factual matter, so the court really shouldn't be quarreling with that, but that is one possibility. And then there's the possibility that the court could accept the broader argument that CSS is making, which is, that they have a constitutional right to religious exemptions from the to a religious exemption from the non-discrimination requirement. If it does that, the implications are truly profound. First and foremost, that kind of ruling could have serious consequences for the more than 400,000 children in foster care across the country. Because if agencies can exclude families based on religious criteria that have nothing to do with the ability to care for a child, it's going to obviously make it even harder to find families to provide foster care to them. And the loss of families would not be limited to families within the LGBT community, which would be bad enough, but there are already foster care agencies across the country that exclude families that don't share the agency's faith. So that includes the largest, you may have all read about, the Miracle Hill Agency in South Carolina. The largest state contracted agency in South Carolina accepts only evangelical Protestant Christians and has excluded Catholic and Jewish families and other families. So a broad ruling for CSS based on that broader argument could mean that every state across the country and every city would be forced to permit discrimination of that nature in their public child welfare system, despite the damaging consequences for children that the system was created to serve. But the consequences would not stop there. They would go much further, right? If there is a constitutional right to opt out of non-discrimination requirements by providers of government services, it's hard to see why or how that could be limited to foster care. Governments contract with private organizations to provide a whole range of services, from homeless shelters, domestic violence shelters, food banks, after-school programs, healthcare, all sorts of things. So people could be turned away from these critical services because they're LGBT, Jewish, Muslim, Mormon, or any other reason that or any other reason that they don't meet a contractor's religious standards. In addition, this case involves the government contract services contracting context. Where, again, what's so extraordinary about the case is that it is this agency is seeking a right to opt out of a non-discrimination requirement when providing a government service on this government's behalf. But if there's a right in that context, it's really hard to see why it would apply in private contexts like public accommodations laws, businesses, restaurants, hotels, or even employers. So the assertion of a religious objection to compliance could mean that the government is unable to enforce the law and protect people from discrimination of all kinds in numerous contexts. And it's because of these really extraordinary implications that there was an outpouring of friend of the court briefs in support of our side. More than 1,000 voices we counted, supporting the city's ability to require taxpayer-funded government service contractors to comply with non-discrimination requirements. So that included all the major child welfare groups, that included families who have experienced discrimination because of their sexual orientation or their faith, including Philadelphia families, included faith leaders from diverse faith traditions across the country concerned about opening the door to discrimination against minority faith communities. We had amicus briefs from a broad array of civil rights organizations, because we know that all kinds of discrimination have been rooted for some in religious beliefs, whether race discrimination, sex discrimination, or others. So these groups powerfully express the concern about opening the door to all kinds of discrimination. Another important brief I would flag, because I really found it compelling, was advocates for seniors and disabled people expressing their concern about barriers to accessing critical government services that these communities especially depend on. And finally, there were briefs from 24 states, numerous cities, and other government entities talking about how it would hamper their ability to deliver all kinds of government services if they were required to allow discrimination by those contractors that provide that service. They also, and I found this really interesting, talked about how unseemly it would be for a government to have to notify the community, the public, about which agencies would or would not accept their kind. Imagine a government having to post on the internet or wherever those kinds of communications. So while this case isn't getting that much public attention right now, perhaps because the world is falling apart all around us in so many ways, the stakes are really, really high. And just before I go, I'm sorry if I'm over time, but I imagine folks may be wondering about the implications of the change in court now that Justice Ginsburg has passed away and her seat may be filled by someone who we would expect to be less receptive to our position. And we don't know whether Amy Coney Barrett will be confirmed before November 4th, when the argument is scheduled to be heard. If she is, she will participate in the argument, and that's certainly not good news. Although, again, we feel that their other side's position is so extreme that we should win before any set of judges or justices. If it turns out the argument goes forward with an 8-member court, if there's not if she's not confirmed before November 4th, in the event the court evenly divides 4-4, then they have the choice of affirming the decision below, because a divided court could be an affirmance, or they would have the option, if they chose to set the case for re-argument when the next justice would be, or after the next justice would be confirmed. So a lot of question marks, we really don't know, but what this means is, as with many other cases, what happens in the Senate over the next few weeks is potentially going to have a very significant impact on the case. Thanks.
Okay, thank you so much, Leslie. Stephanie had said this in the chat, but I want to make sure folks know that we are going to do a Q&A after the speakers have spoken. So to the extent that you have questions for Leslie, please put them in there. We are monitoring that, and we'll make sure they get handled. Now I'm going to pass it to Tariem, our board chair, who I think is going to introduce our next speaker.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. So I have the pleasure to introduce Julie Kruse, correct? Excellent. Who is the Director of Federal Policy for Family Equality. Welcome, Julie. Julie, you're based out in DC, and you play a crucial role in implementing and expanding family equality's public policy agenda and providing a strong voice for LGBT families on Capitol Hill. Julie also has 15 years of experience advocating for LGBT community, immigrants, working families, women, and girls. Julie's efforts have contributed to victories, including relief from deportation of tens of thousands of LGBT immigrant families, ending Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and stopping discriminatory tax audits of low-income families. Prior to her career in advocacy, she developed job training and educational programs leading to high-wage careers for women and girls. Julie was the founding director of the National Community Tax Coalition. She served on the Governor's Commission on the Status of Women in Illinois and chairs his Pay Equity Program Working Group. She's taught at the college and high school levels in U.S. and Latin America. Julie, you have done amazing things, I must say, before I continue. Julie also holds a Master in Education from Northwestern University and graduated summa cum laude from Distinction in Honors Biology from the University of Illinois. And also, she's a proud step-parent and grandparent. So welcome, Julie.
Wow, thank you. That was an elaborate introduction. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
So I am supposed to be speaking about what's at stake at the federal level for LGBTQ families and trans folks. And I think from Leslie's presentation, it's clear that's a lot at stake, and there's a lot at stake on the ballot and on the Supreme Court docket. So I'll be talking about both of those things. But just to take a step back, if you don't know Family Equality, we're an organization representing folks like you, LGBTQ parents, as well as LGBTQ young people seeking family formation, such as foster youth and unaccompanied refugee minors. And we have a lot of programming services for people seeking to form your families. We have, over the last 7 months of this pandemic, been providing LGBTQ affirming activities for family members of all ages online. So everything from kind of a weekly drag queen story hour for the toddlers up through teens and adults. So you can check that out. And we also have a national network of LGBTQ family organizations, and there's 123 of those. And so we're really happy to have Philly Family Pride as part of that network, and really as an outstanding member of that network. We partner closely with Philly Family Pride. We lead the effort to pass the Every Child Deserves a Family Act, which would end discrimination in foster care and adoption. And Philly Family Pride was essential in getting two key Ways and Means members, that's the Committee of Jurisdiction, onto the bill from Philly, Representative Evans and Boyle. So really happy to be here. And to talk a little bit about what's at stake, I just want to talk a little bit about what the Trump administration has done over the last few years in the area of foster care and adoption and some other areas, but it's almost unhinged. And we have a webpage that talks about just what they've done in 2019 and 2020 in the child welfare arena, and it's a very long list, so I'm not going to go through the whole thing. But starting in January of 2019, HHS issued a waiver to the state of South Carolina so that Miracle Hill Ministries and other faith-based agencies, as Leslie pointed out, could turn away Jewish and Catholic and Muslim and secular families. The waiver didn't actually allow them to turn away LGBTQ families, but they interpret it as that. So they have always, and they continue to turn away LGBTQ families. And the cardinal rule in child welfare is you have to act in the best interests of children. Every employer, every family, every person who applies to be a mentor at Miracle Hill Ministries has to sign a statement that marriage is between a man and a woman and gender is immutable, assigned at birth and can't change. So basically transgender kids don't exist. So it is really sad to think about the 30% of foster youth who identify as LGBTQ who are being served by Miracle Hill Ministries, because one thing we hear from LGBTQ and Two-Spirit foster youth is that the key to their well-being is finding just one adult who is affirming of their identity. And the chance of that happening if they're served by Miracle Hill Ministries is really, really low. And kids don't get to pick which agency they work with. So Leslie pointed out that maybe the government will tell parents you know, if you're gay, you have to go here. If you're this, you have to go there. But kids don't get that choice. They do not get to choose the agency serving them. And both the president and vice president spoke up frequently about the need to allow faith-based child welfare agencies to discriminate, which is usually a bit sign that something bad's coming. And then the HHS, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, stopped collecting data on sexual orientation and gender identity for foster youth and parents. And Lambda Legal has sued them over that. And then last November, HHS got rid of its entire grants program non-discrimination protections, really for the purpose of being able to discriminate in child welfare against LGBTQ people, kids and adults, and against religious minority parents. And we and several other organizations have sued HHS over that in the Family Equality v. Azar case. And sorry, that was because HHS also said we're just going to stop enforcing our regulations, even though they were still in place, and that's not really something you can do. And I think one of the discouraging things about this administration and its attacks on LGBTQ people is that every single federal agency has carried out these attacks. I think a lot of us know that HUD just issued rulemaking to allow homeless shelters, for example, to turn away trans people seeking emergency shelter. But really the agencies that have been the forefront of attacking our community have been the child serving agencies. So the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Department of Education. And they've really come after our kids. And so I think that's one of the most important things that's on the ballot this fall is our LGBTQ kids, our trans kids that want to go to the bathroom and live their identity and participate in sports. And we see the Department of Education is even defunding school districts that allow trans kids to participate on sports teams. So our families and our kids are at stake. What else is at stake is our health care, our health. And I urge you to call both of your senators, if you're in Pennsylvania, Toomey and Casey, and tell them not to move forward with a confirmation of a Supreme Court nominee, but to pass COVID relief legislation so that we can protect our health and, of course, our pocketbooks. And we know our community has really been economically impacted, especially LGBTQ people and families of color have been more impacted economically by this pandemic than other families. But not just our health in terms of the COVID crisis, but also our health care, because we know that Amy Coney Barrett thinks that the Supreme Court should not have upheld the Affordable Care Act. And the Affordable Care Act is coming before the court a week after Fulton. And so even if your senators can help delay Amy Coney Barrett being seated, it might not only help Fulton, but it will help transgender people who can now access health care without discrimination because of the Affordable Care Act, our kids who are over the age of 18 and not yet 26, and who are on our health care plans, and of course also 68% of LGBTQ people have pre-existing conditions compared to 51% of the general public. So the Affordable Care Act is really, really critical to us and also to trans people's ability to access transition-related care. What else is on the docket before the Supreme Court this fall? A voting rights case on our voter suppression law in the Southwest that has suppressed the African-American, Latinx, and Native American vote. There's a case about holding police accountable who kill or injure civilians. So those of us that care a lot about racial justice and assaults on Black and brown bodies, including LGBTQ, African-American, trans people, that's coming before the Supreme Court. And we know for the 21% of LGBTQ people that plan on forming our families through IVF or reciprocal IVF, Amy Coney Barrett does believe that life begins at fertilization, and she's supported organizations that want to criminalize doctors and possibly even women who avail themselves, or parents, I should say, who avail themselves of IVF. And of course, all of those same things are on the ballot. I would say that's a summary, and I would ask you to take action. Again, call your senators, tell them no confirmation of any Supreme Court justice before the next president is inaugurated, and instead act to pass COVID relief now, because we're all hurting, and that's hopefully a message that they can hear. And then finally, of course, as the previous speakers have said, vote. And Stephanie, I don't know if you can put up that polling question about how folks on this call plan to vote.
I can. Give me 1 second to find it. Polls.
And then the last thing I will say is that if you have a foster care and adoption story, Family Equality is working with ACLU and other groups to share those stories while you're voting on this poll. And so I'm going to put the link. If you could share your story, we will try to get it out there and to help educate the public about what's at stake in the Fulton case. This is where you can share your story. I'll put it in the chat. Oh, and that's super exciting that a quarter of the people on this call have already voted. That is absolutely thrilling. And when you call your senators, tell them that the American people need to speak, and the American people are already speaking. The people are already voting, and so they should not jam through a Supreme Court justice while the people are deciding who should select that justice. Oh, now we're up to a third of the folks who already.
You can add me too. I can't run the poll and answer it apparently, but I also voted already.
And thank you all for that. And I'm glad the rest of you have a plan.
Thank you, Julie. So we're just going to jump into the Q&A. Malcolm is running a little bit late, but
I'm now here. I'm so sorry.
Oh, you're here. Oh.
Yay.
So I'm sorry if I could just say briefly, please charge my tardiness, to my heart. I mean, to my head, not my heart, because I just ended a march. I, like many of you, have been seeing so much of the gun violence that's happened, and so much of it has been happening in my district, and some amazing activists in my district organized a march, and it was the most beautiful thing to have people, just like so many of you on this call, stepping up and taking control of what's happening in our community. Because Stephanie, who I've known for many, many years, and thank you so much, Stephanie, for what you do. I'm just so grateful to you. But Stephanie, a long time ago, when we met, is the perfect example of the type of citizen advocacy that we really need to see. And I reject this idea, this notion that big things only happen because of politicians, right? The major things that really impact our community and make the quality of life better for all of our families, no matter what those families look like, are really because of people like you who step up, who volunteer their time, who have 1,000 other things going on, and who then plug into this work. And so, again, super sorry for being late. I'm sorry that I'm in my car, but these are our times, and we're sort of juggling 1,000 things at once, but I'm incredibly grateful to be here.
Malcolm, please don't be sorry for being out there. I know you're doing the Flip PA as well, so don't be sorry for being out there, standing up for us and changing minds and changing hearts. There's nothing to be sorry about that. So really appreciate all the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
And luckily I have a second opportunity to introduce you this week, so happy about that. So I just want to introduce PA State Representative Malcolm Kenyatta. He was elected to serve as state representative for the 181st Legislative District here in Philadelphia County in 2018. He's a product of Philadelphia Public Schools and a graduate of Temple University. And Harvard Kennedy School's senior executive in state and local government. He currently serves as the vice chair of the Philadelphia House Delegation and is a member of the governor's task force on suicide prevention and holds a host of committee leadership position. As the first openly LGBTQ person of color, one of the youngest members elected to the PA General Assembly, he is deeply committed to creating an equitable and inclusive society. As a legislator, he has championed proposals and addressed generational poverty, raise the minimum wage, and protect workers' rights, increase access to mental health care, enact common sense measures to address gun violence, and strengthen our digital infrastructure. So without further ado, Malcolm, I'd welcome you to talk with us today.
Well, thank you again, and you got my mea culpa, but now we do have serious things to talk about. Yes. As it relates to our families. And I came in just as we were talking about the Supreme Court, and I'm so happy that you're focusing on that, because like many of you, I was disgusted, and there's other words that I would use, but we're on a family call, and so you can imagine that our first day that the Supreme Court is back in session, you have Clarence Thomas and Justice Alito talking about how we need to rethink and, was wrongly decided as it relates to our families. And so, the Supreme Court is certainly one of the many things, that are on the ballot. And though we got that one, case from Gorsuch over the summer, the reality is here in Pennsylvania, and I know I'm talking to people who already know this, but we still don't have protections, holistic protections for our, community here in Pennsylvania. And it's a part of the reason, that I've been spending so much time and donating so much money to, colleagues and future colleagues, because if we want to change outcomes for folks in our communities, it really matters who's elected in districts that are outside of where we live. And there are folks who are running in very, very competitive races who we need to win if we're going to protect some of our most basic rights. And that is what's so frustrating to me. And then I would love to just go to whatever questions are out there. But that's what's been so frustrating since I've been in office. I will use the only hockey metaphor I have, and I think I used it earlier this week, but I feel like I'm so often a goalie, right? Just trying to block as many bad things as possible. But I'm not whoever the other player is that's like moving the puck down the ice. I'm not that person. And I want to learn what position that is, and I want to be that person in the legislature because we have 102 seats. And we have people that understand that all of our families matter, that we should not be still debating our basic right to exist and to build our communities. I mean, it's sort of ridiculous because there are so many other things that we need to do that take us from basic rights to living lives that are full and whole. And that requires passing some of the policy proposals that you all have championed for a long time. But so often we're just still talking about the basics. We're still talking about hate crime protections, even as we see our trans brothers and sisters, particularly trans women of color, be murdered at historic rates. We're still fighting to protect them and to talk about the need for increased penalties for folks who go after them simply because of how they identify. We're still fighting to not be kicked out of public accommodations because of how we identify or who we love. And that's incredibly frustrating, to be completely candid with you. And that's why I've been spending so much time, as I said, going around the state. And so I went around 5 days, before, and now I'm doing, I guess, 3 or 4 days. I'm supporting 8 other candidates, including Jess Benham, who is going to be the first queer woman ever elected in Pennsylvania. I'm so excited. And so I'll be with her on Sunday. And so with that, I would just shut up, and whatever questions exist, I would love to answer. And again, I do want to apologize for being late because I hate being late to anything. So this last apology is for me.
Well, thank you again, Malcolm, and we're thrilled you're here. I mean, truly, truly thrilled. Stephanie's indicated it in the chat, but folks, if you have questions for any of our really amazing speakers who have given up some of their Saturday, please type them in. Tariem and I will get to them. To kick things off, though, I did want to ask Leslie a quick question about now Judge, potentially Justice Barrett, and whether anything she decided in the Seventh Circuit or any of her writings, whether they've given us any sense at all of how she might come down in our case. I mean, I think a lot of us suspect where she might be going, but I think I'd be interested in your insight on what we might anticipate.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anything that she has said it should give us reason to feel positive or encouraged. And, she appears to be, selected because she is a reliable conservative vote, right? So she's been very clear on reproductive freedom issues that she's not for it. And I think, our assumption is that that she will deliver what she was held out to offer as a nominee. But again, I do think it is hard to say. This case, it is such an extraordinary claim that is being made. This is not Masterpiece Cake Shop, where the question is regulation of private businesses. This is about the government's ability to ensure that government services are provided to all who are eligible, and that in the foster care context, specifically to be able to welcome every ready, willing, and able family who comes forward to care for children. And because the consequences for the government's ability to partner with the private sector to provide services, I think, would be so significant. And frankly, I think there's a real conservative, anti-big government message here that, frankly, a lot of governments are not going to continue providing services by contracting them out to private businesses if doing so means that business or organization gets to dictate how the service is provided. And so for a lot of conservatives who are trying to make government smaller and believe that privatization is the solution to everything, I think this case should cause them concern. So we certainly think we should have a good shot here, but we recognize there's a lot of ideology at play.
Yeah, no, I think that's helpful, and that's a different perspective on sort of a more conservative argument on it than I've heard. Going to the chat, Tariem, are you okay with me moving to the chat?
Yeah, Malcolm, you unmuted. Did you have something else to add to that?
I wanted to ask Leslie a quick follow-up, if I could. If this case is wrongly decided, what are some of the legislative, things that you would be looking for right away to try to at least sand off as much of the rough edges of this as possible? And obviously how the opinion is written is going to have a big impact on that. But
yeah. And wow, I don't like to think about that, but of course we do have to think about it. And if they issue the broadest possible ruling, which is Constitution gives you a free exercise right, even when you're contracting to provide a government service, to opt out of non-discrimination requirements that you don't believe are in harmony with your faith. That's a constitutional ruling. So what governments can do to fix that problem is, are pretty limited because it is a constitutional ruling. That being said, no governments are required to partner with the private sector to provide services. So I do think, and this will be a real problem for many state, local, federal government entities, right? That they could be put to the choice of having to just provide all their services in-house with government employees, which they could do. But as far as constitutional rulings, there's not a lot that could be done to change it, because it's now the constitutional law of the land that there is this constitutional right. Now, there are ways that there could be a constitutional ruling that could be very bad, but not as all-encompassing. So they could say that there's something about the specific facts of what happened in Philadelphia in terms of, so for example, I didn't want to get into legal doctrine of standards that the court applies, but one standard the other side is trying to get applied is what's called the strict scrutiny standard, to put the burden on the government to demonstrate that they enforcing the non-discrimination law against this agency is the least restrictive means of furthering their interest in protecting against discrimination and maximizing the pool of families. They are arguing on the other side, there are 28 other agencies, what's the big deal? Why can't they just refer people to other agencies. There's a lot to say about that. The fact that LGBTQ people would be getting one subset of agencies and everybody else can choose from all of them is a real problem. It's stigmatizing. It's not equality. It deters people who have to figure out, am I going to be humiliated when I reach out to an agency, or am I going to be accepted? So, they could do a narrow ruling like that, saying something about those specific contexts. So there may be room. We'll have to see what the court says if they go the wrong way. But there may be things the governments can do to make sure their systems are set up in a way to protect against these kinds of claims. But again, it's hard to know without seeing what the court says.
Thank you, Julie, and thank you, Malcolm, for that follow-up question. So we have some questions in the chat, and the first one I have is from Steph. How do you think we can fight for equality on something that is so deeply personal to us in a way that will persuade the undecided? This is to everyone.
I can begin on that. I have been holding meetings with constituents with 12 swing Republican senators over the last few weeks and plan to over the next week. And I have to say it is hard with families both from Utah and Colorado when we met with Romney and Gardner's teams. Both families were very calm, cool, and collected, but when it came time to explain why they didn't want Amy Coney Barrett on the Supreme Court, both families broke down and cried, and we had to kind of stop the meeting to let you collect yourself, because it is very humiliating to have your family on the line. That said, and Stephanie, I don't know if we can do this, but one of the families on the call did a short video for us about why she opposes Amy Coney Barrett, and if we have 1 minute to show it, I could do that. But that is when you explain why you oppose this nomination, it is actually very powerful. And if you want to send me a 1 minute video about why you oppose her nomination, we will be pushing these videos out all week during the confirmation hearings over the next week. So it really does make a difference. And, I just was looking at polling that showed that over 70% of Americans believe that both marriage equality and transgender military service is a live and let live issue. And that's something that Leslie was kind of speaking of. It's no longer like, yeah, you kind of deserve rights. It's like, no, if we don't give you full marriage equality or allow you to serve in the military, we're not really allowing you to live and let live, which is like a core fundamental Republican value. So that's where Americans are at with our families. And when you explain the impact of something like this on our family, it does make a difference. But I do get that it is degrading and humiliating to even have to do that. But there's a lot of people that don't get it. So when you explain your personal story, it really helps. And we know that about 30% of the American public is undecided on Fulton. So certainly if you tell your story and explain why this case matters to families like you and to our kids, I think the polling also shows that when you tell your stories, that does shift public opinion dramatically in our favor.
I think Julie answered that incredibly well. And so if I could add something from a different angle, we've spent the last 4 years, and I see some of the people on the call, and I know that some of you were at that first protest at the airport a little bit after Trump was elected. And it feels like every day is something else. And obviously there's like a pandemic going on that has completely upended all of our lives and the lives of the young people around us. And so I would just say, and I just always try to remind people who've been on the front lines of this in the way that you all have, that you can't pour from an empty cup. And so I hope that we're all taking the time to take care of ourselves, like in a genuine way, and like not just getting a manicure and a pedicure, but like seriously, like turning it all off for a little bit and turning inward to the people who love us best and to our families, and remind ourselves of why we fight so hard when we do have to fight, because that is so important. But I will tell you, I have felt so run down And I know like we're not allowed to say that, right? Because we have to be strong all the time and we have to just go all the time. But I know a lot of people feel that way. We are just so tired, like just tired, not physically tired, just like drained. And so like watch a show on Amazon or like do what I do. I love the Great British Bake Off. I just love it. Everybody's so happy and they're like baking little souffles, whatever. And so I really do think that that is a big part of it as well, because I'm always concerned about people who are giving 100% all the time. And then we come home and the people who love us, they don't get us at our best because we've been a warrior all day long. And so I know that there are, you know, amazing strategies Julie talked about, which I think are completely spot on in terms of when you're on and you're working. But I do think that we have to like turn off a little bit.
No, I think that's great, and I think that's important. And I think, as you said, a lot of the folks on this call have been involved in a lot of the work, and I hope they take your words to mind right now. Another question from the chat was from Vicky, who's asking what sort of alliances should the LGBTQ community be organizing that we haven't, you know, historically done as good of a job on. Open to anybody.
I'll just take that briefly, and I'll promise to be brief. I think, and I'm doing this work internally when I talk to Black and Brown folks, but I will tell you, I so often get as like a queer Black legislator, you know, Malcolm, are you advocating for LGBTQ stuff, or are you advocating for Black stuff? And like the reality is like those distinctions don't really make sense to me as somebody who's gay all the time and Black all the time. But I will tell you that across the movement for Black lives and some of the other things around police violence and all these different things, when I talk about issues of poverty, all of these are also queer issues. And I think that we have to make that a part of our mission. And so when folks say like, what's next? Because we get that question on a lot of panels of like, what's next for the LGBTQ community? And I'm like, all the stuff that we never finished in terms of making sure everybody in our community is treated equally. And so we have this amazing opportunity in this gargantuan task, being a community that represents people from every faith community, every religion, race, ethnicity, every age group, to make sure that when we think about queer issues, that we're thinking about them from the intersectional lens that they really do deserve. And I know we've like Audre Lorded like that quote to death, that people don't live single issue lives, but it is so, so true. And so we need to be looking for allies everywhere because they exist and members of our community are everywhere.
Well, thank you. Oh, Julie, you have something to say too?
Well, I would just say that we need to stand up for ourselves and for our allies. Just because it is Indigenous Peoples Weekend, when the Trump administration has, as they've been coming after LGBTQ kids and families in foster care, they've really been coming after tribal kids in foster care and families. It's really remarkable. And so, you know, sometimes you have to play defense together because you're both being attacked, but also there are LGBTQ and Two-Spirit foster youth and families. And I'm just really proud that this year when the House passed its HHS appropriations bill, it actually, we requested that they speak about the particular challenges faced by Two-Spirit and LGBTQ tribal youth and families. And I'm not sure that that's ever been in legislation passed by the House before, but let's speak up and let's stand up. We know that tribal families are 4 times more likely to have their kids removed in child welfare, and we know that lesbian and bisexual women are 4 times more likely to have our kids removed in child welfare. So we can find common ground and stand up together. And of course, it's not even standing up together for the LGBTQ and Two-Spirit tribal people who are in both of our communities.
Thank you, Julie. So we're approaching the hour. So Want to first say thank you all for attending this, and I have one last question. So this is also National Coming Out Weekend, and we all come out different points in our lives and at different times and multiple times in some way. So because this is our Family Matters Conference, what do you all have to say, or could you say, to the families that are now coming out now or during this time, which is a very, very strange time? Any words of wisdom or positive words you'd like to share with them? Oh no, did I freeze? Oh no.
I would just say now during the
Oh.
pandemic, this is Leslie. I just think now during the pandemic, when so many of us are isolated in so many ways, coming out is not as day-to-day thing as it would normally be when we're out in the world more. So that's that's why I'm scratching my head with that question a little bit.
I thought I froze. Sorry.
No, I think Leslie's right. That is a really hard question, because coming out, depending on your family, like, I was outed, and that was really tough. And so I don't know if it's ever easy depending on where you are, but hopefully it inspires us to redouble, our efforts. When Stephanie and I were both on the board of Liberty City, we talked a lot about our homeless youth, a majority of whom are LGBTQ, many of whom were kicked out of their homes because they came out and didn't feel safe where they were. And so, I hope it just sparks a fire under us to recognize that we need safe spaces for our young people to be if they come out and don't have a supportive adult right away. Obviously, people can learn, and like my mom and dad, God rest their souls, like they learned and they came around and they got educated about what they didn't know. But you're right, that is a really tough question. I hate that I don't have a better answer.
Well, on that note, I want to again say thank you to everyone. Oh, well, actually, I have one last question. What can we do to get our voices heard? What is one takeaway message that you would like to share with us?
I would just say, speak truth to power. I set up a meeting with some North Carolinians with Senator Tom Tillis's office, a Republican. And that was just yesterday. And I had a 13-year-old trans girl and a 23-year-old former foster youth who was trans, and then an older trans North Carolinian. And they listened. So you are people's constituents, and when you speak your truth to power, it can make a real difference. And maybe not today, but sometimes we meet with brand new staffers, and I think, oh, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, they're going to remember you because you were one of the first constituents they ever heard. So just don't underestimate your voice, because this is what I do every day, is connect people to policymakers to tell their personal stories. And it really does make a difference. And so thank you if you do that. It's tough, but it's important.
Thank you, Julie.
And if I could quickly build on what Julie, yeah, go ahead.
Leslie.
No, Leslie.
Well,
no, Leslie, go ahead, please.
Sure. I was just going to say, Julie and her team at Family Equality did an incredible job reaching out and collecting stories of families who experienced discrimination in the foster care system, and put together a brief that was so powerful that anytime I talk to anyone, I say, you have to read this brief. It just tells stories of people who they faced the discrimination and that hurt them, but the impact on children who they were seeking to care for was so devastating. Stories of a family that tried to bring together, reunify two teenage boys who were in separate homes, but one of the caseworkers for one of the boys said, no, we won't place with a same-sex couple. So to find families willing to take two teenage boys that doesn't come around every day. That may have been the only chance for those kids. And another family where I get chills every time I think about that. They were turned away when they sought to adopt a child who was featured on a Waiting Children website that they do to recruit families for kids who need adoptive families. And they were told, no, they won't place with a same-sex couple. And then several years later, they see his picture is still up, being, having families recruited for him when he could have been adopted years earlier. And it is heartbreaking. So these stories I think are going to have a significant impact. I'm hoping they will, to see the harms of the discriminatory treatment, that it doesn't just affect the adults, it affects the children in this profound way. So I thank you, Julie and her colleagues did an amazing job reaching out all over the country, collecting these really powerful stories.
Thank you, Leslie. Malcolm?
And I would just buttress what was just said by both panelists to say, like, please don't doubt that you are being heard. Sometimes if we speak up and we don't get change right away, it feels hopeless, but it really is not hopeless. All of my siblings are adopted, and so how we treat foster youth, how we treat folks who are trying to be adopted, this matters deeply personally to me. And just know that you're not alone. Just know that, like, I promise you, as a legislator, when you call and tweet and send letters, I hear it. I promise you. Even if folks don't agree with you, they do hear you. And so a part of it is just having the consistency and not getting weary and well-doing, because you are being heard. And folks like Julie and Leslie and Stephanie and everybody who's doing this work are really, really helping to position your stories in front of people who need to hear them. And unfortunately, change takes a long time. And in some cases, it's really, really, really hard. But if you walk away because you think it's not working, you might have been right on the edge of the progress that you were seeking. So again, watch a little Great British Bake Off. Take a little break, get back at it on Monday, because people do hear you. It makes a difference. Do not give up.
Thank you, Malcolm, and thank you, Julie, and thank you, Leslie, and everyone that has attended today. Our 11th annual Family Matters Conference, and first, or inaugural, hopefully we're in person next year, virtual conference. We just really appreciate everyone just being here today and kind of showing that even though we are apart, that we are still a community, and it's just really great to see so many faces here virtually. Also, Stephanie has put it in the chat that there is evaluation to fill out, as well as if you'd like to save the chat from this, you just click the three little dots and it'll allow you to save the chat. And also, if you would like to share your story with the Family Equality Council, Stephanie also put that in the chat. So again, thank you all. And when I started this, for the keynote this morning, I said knees up, because you may get tired, but the race is not over. There's still many legs of this to run. So knees up.
That's a runner thing for people who aren't runners. Keep your knees up.
Maybe that's where I got it from when I can't. Anyway, so yeah, keep your knees up. You have support. And as Malcolm just said, you may just be right there. So keep it up. Keep going. And again, thank you all for attending today. I know we all say we wave now. But
Yeah.